Alien Enemies Act. 1798 is a 227-year-old piece of legislation that has been invoked, I think, 3 times. And the last time was in the commie terror of the 50s or the 40s. It allows the deportation of it requires being in a state of war or being invaded by what they call not enemy combatants, but there's a term for it. The question is, America is, quote, obviously not at war. At least they haven't declared war by Congress, but these could be regarded as something of an enemy invading force. The joke, not the joke. I don't know that anybody heard this, but we discussed this with John Eastman in the context of the birthright citizenship debate. If you regard it as an alien, an invading force, you could then say, well, any child born of this invading force does not benefit from birthright citizenship in a bid to deport them. Trump is invoking this act in order to preclude or allow for the deportation. They are called Trena de Aragena. I don't know what it means. It might be a region. Someone in the chat will tell me what that TDA means. He ordered the deportation of them within 2 hours on a Saturday. The judge is Judge Boasberg, who was intimately involved with a number of the Jan 6 cases. He was intimately involved with I want to say the Steele dossier, but I'm not necessarily certain about that.
Because he was one of the signatories on the FISA warrants that approved a bunch of the illegal spying on the Trump campaign.
And I was getting thought I was getting confused between Perkins Coie and having their clearance revoked. They were intimately involved with the Steele dossier, Mark Elias in particular. This is an activist judge. He's the Chief Justice of...
You forgot to introduce Mark Elias.
I won't do it.
Criminal money launderer, Mike Elias. Criminal money launderer, Mark Elias.
I need to have like a... no. Okay, I'm joking. So this is
Viva disclaimer.
Yeah, this is like... This is Robert Barnes' opinion, not mine. Although it's a stated fact, according to Robert Barnes. That's a joke. All right. So Boasberg is this activist judge. He's the chief judge of the District of Columbia. Within 2 hours says no, issuing a temporary restraining order, which is going to be in effect for 2 weeks, and turn the freaking planes around. This is where I was thinking maybe Trump was being smarter than the judge. It's like, oh, I'll have 10 planes up in the air. You don't know which 2 they're on. And so order the wrong 2 back, and we'll bring those back. They ended up in El Salvador in prisons there, from what I understand. That's Alex Jones reporting. I guess the
El Salvadoran president. Credit to by the way, El Salvadoran president, Lebanese background, ancestrally, comes from a left populist tradition, which is very common in Central and Latin America. And here he is, one of Trump's best allies, because he locked up all their crazy criminals so they could have some degree of peace in El Salvador. And he's like, hey, our system's working pretty good, President Trump. Send them all down for a very cheap fee. We'll warehouse them for you. And, credit to him, smart guy, also embracing Bitcoin in the financial revolution, other aspects.
Well, it's an amazing thing. I don't know very many El Salvadorians, but I do know the anecdotal evidence is that within a matter of a very short period of time, all of El Salvador has turned around. Some proponents of...
About 70 years of civil war and nasty violence in a cartel-driven country. And you contrast that to the bonus case we're talking about tonight, the Philippines, that almost became a cartel country, and the guy that helped prevent it become a drug country is now sitting in The Hague, somehow arrested by the International Criminal Court for doing his job about the cartels there. But we'll get to that a little bit later.
So the act is 227 years old, 1798. I guess the question is, contextually, what the heck was the context of that law being introduced in the first place? I mean, that's...
Well, as usual, you can usually blame the Brits. The Brits always have some bad ideas. So Benedict Arnold, the famous traitor Benedict Arnold, did the raid on Richmond in 1781, and it reminded everybody, what do we do if there's a predatory incursion, if there is an invasion by or on the behalf of or at the behest of or simply from a foreign nation or government? That's important. You're going to hear a lot of liberals pretend that there has to be an actual invasion by a foreign government or war. There doesn't. One part of the Alien Enemies Act is for war. Another part says if there is either an invasion or a predatory incursion or merely attempted invasion or merely attempted predatory incursion by a foreign nation or government. Why is or government there? Because of the Benedict Arnolds of the world who might not be doing it authorized by the British government. So it's that they're from a foreign nation that poses a national security threat. That's kind of it. Here, Trump has specifically targeted a very particular. He hasn't done it with every gang, hasn't done it with all the Mexican drug cartels or any of the others. He has specifically isolated the Venezuelan gang, TDA. And the reason he's done so is because it's been an open secret. We've talked about it. Years ago, the Venezuelan president Maduro decided to pay back the U.S. for imposing sanctions on his government and for trying to do a coup, overthrow his government, by sending their nastiest, most vicious, and violent gang members, which had become, by that point, the most violent gang in the world, surpassing MS-13. Because what they saw was MS-13 originally established its power by being the most violent gang in the world. So, like, how do we replace MS-13? We'd be more violent than them. We'd be more extreme than them. They would come in and take over whole neighborhoods and take over entire criminal networks because their violence was just so off the charts. It was like what we were seeing in Cancun about a decade ago, where, you know, heads were on stakes, bodies were were hanging off of bridges. It was, you know, when the cartels went nuts in Mexico, the more violent won. And so he picked Maduro deliberately in the Venezuelan regime. It's pretty obvious. Sent them up into the United States to pay back Biden for his sanctions. So you couldn't have a more compelling example of a invasion
Predatory.
or predatory incursion than what. And this is the gang that's been taking over places in Texas, places in Aurora, Colorado. This is the same gang. They come in and take over the entire criminal operation by being the most extreme, most violent, and they did it at a minimum with the wink and the nod of the Venezuelan government, who also were just trying to get rid of their criminals, right? Well, Venezuela's had a horrible crime problem for about a decade. How better to solve it? Hey, we'll just say there's a lot more greener pastures in the U.S. And they use George Soros NGAs and USA aid money to get them here.
And just to read what it means, the train of the Aragua train, which is the region, the gang itself started in Tocaron prison in Aragua, evolved from a local prison syndicate into a major player in organized crime across Latin America, led by figures like whomever these figures are. It's known for activities like human trafficking, extortion, drug smuggling. What did even in the context of the law?
You see it. They're described as they're so relentless that they're like a train off the tracks in uncontrolled coming through. That's who they are. That's who they fashion themselves as. So to me, do they fit the definition of a predatory incursion? Yep. Were they sent or did they come from a foreign nation? Yep. Do they pose a risk of national security? Yep. What does the Alien Enemies Act say? President can have is given, quote, the Supreme Court of the United States, exact quote, very great discretionary powers under the Constitution and under the statute to get rid of these bums. And yet here you have this rogue judge in D.C. who thinks he can rewrite the law himself and force the President of the United States to allow foreign terrorists, this is a foreign terror organization at this point, this gang, into our borders. And it tells you how nuts the courts have given. Credit to President Trump, who didn't turn the planes around. Hey, Judge Boat, you want to turn the planes around? You get on a plane, get down there and do that. When you get elected president, you let me know. You have it. But this is all because Justice Roberts didn't do his job to save the courts from themselves. And it's because Congress hasn't stepped into the breach, and the Justice Department hasn't stepped into the breach at doing something about these rogue judges. Including, Chief Judge Howell was similarly doing insane rulings this week. This is the nutty judge out of the District of Corruption who tried to rig cases to prosecute President Trump, violating his attorney-client privilege, violating his constitutionally protected privilege, as the Supreme Court of the United States would itself ultimately recognize. That's who this lunatic judge is. She goes around giving political lectures about how horrible Trump supporters are. I mean, this is a nut job who has no business on the federal bench. Never did. She needs to be impeached tomorrow. She should have been impeached yesterday.
I was just wondering,
better than never.
If Boasberg, he orders the planes to turn around, they didn't turn around. They're in jail in El Salvador. Had he flown them to the jurisdiction of Guantanamo Bay? I mean, would that?
The court's power to do anything about that has always been an open question, and I think that'd be an issue. I mean, if you ask me, take him and drop him off at Boatberg's house. Just drop him off. Just drop him off. Say, hey, that judge really loves you. Come on in. You think Judge Boatberg would take him? Or do you think he'd go absolutely ballistic? So the judge just wants him in your neighborhood, not in his neighborhood. That's who these people are. And so these judges that have been the worst need to be impeached. It's the only that's part one. Part two, for the love of the good Lord, get rid of the District of Corruption. The District of Columbia doesn't need its own legal system. That the swamp should not be allowed to judge the critics of the swamp or protect the swamp. So the swamp should not have its own courthouse or its own court system.
I do like it. Hold on, I like that. Yeah, drop him off at the judge's house. I mean, it's bust him.
I mean, he ordered the plane back. Okay, I'm sending him to you, Judge. Good luck. The other thing is, judges should not have U.S. Marshals under their custody. They should have no executive power of any kind. They should be completely dependent on the executive branch for all enforcement power entirely. There should be no collection. There should be no collection remedies available to them outside of the legal system, and they should not have the U.S. Marshals assigned to them. Shouldn't exist. Congress can change that tomorrow. Congress can take away a lot of their law clerks, take away a lot of their budgets. They don't need these fancy court buildings. Come on. So they need to do all of those remedies, as well as take away certain jurisdictions, take away certain authority from these judges in the first instance, clarify that they have no business in the immigration world. They never did, outside of very limited context, which we'll get to, because that relates to the Hamas, alleged Hamas supporter who is being subject to deportation for green cards, because apparently some student visa immigrants didn't realize that a visa to come here and study is not a visa to come here and disrupt our elections. It's not to come here and try to overthrow our government. It's not to come here and stage violent rallies. Now, whether this gentleman did that or not is still an open question. But there's certain things that are protected. There's certain things that aren't. But one broad position, I've heard nobody in the media mention this comparison. There is a president who, in the last half century, has used these aggregate powers to completely kick out people from on student visas based solely on their residence, by the way. Not even based on any conduct they did. Said, if you're from Iran, you're out of here. And that president was named Jimmy Carter, the great human rights president. So the idea that this hasn't, and I don't remember any legal scholars at the time saying, oh, no, you can't do that somehow. They were all silent and mute. But there is one thing that people should be cognizant of, and that's Harry Bridges.
Okay, now hold on. Before we even get there, one last question on the judge. He issued the TRO to last 14 days. It's a fait accompli. They're going to appeal the decision, and they're going to get to whether or not this law can apply to what Trump wants to do by way of designating entities, terrorist organizations, for the purposes of then being able to qualify them as predatorial invaders.
Yeah. I think especially, I'm not a big fan of using that terrorist designation. I've been a long critic of it, not changing my opinion now simply because Trump's utilizing it. Trump's clearly within his legal authority to do so. That's different than whether I think it's a great idea. If there's one group it really belongs to, really attaches to, it is this group of TDA. It is that. I mean, any study, just listen to people from Venezuela, from all over the political spectrum. This group is horrific. Horrific. You're talking about one of the most violent, vile gangs in the world. I mean, nasty doesn't even get close to understand. They make sociopaths. They make Hannibal Lecter look like an amateur. I mean, that's who these people are. They are vicious. They are vile. They get their power by being the most violent and most extreme. So these are people that President Trump has 90% level support for doing what he's doing public policy-wise in this category. And he has clear legal and constitutional authority. Now, contrary to what some people are saying, somebody here legally that is a resident alien on an established green card does have First Amendment rights. And some people are forgetting that aspect. Now, that doesn't mean that they have the rights to the degree they can engage in illegal behavior or some other things. But there's some people that assume that, and there's terrorist support organizations as grounds to expel them. So if you're able to prove that, you can for that purpose. They don't have the same degree of First Amendment protection as American citizens, but they don't have none. And that's thanks to the one individual who managed to get more cases to the Supreme Court of the United States as an individual than any individual in American history. And that's beloved Aussie, former Aussie, turned American, Harry Bridges.